Hi. Can you state your name, please?
Yes, my name is Zoe Nicholson.
And Zoe, may I ask your age and your birth
I'm
date?
67, 8/28/48,
Great. And where were you born?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And were your parents or grandparents immigrants?
Actually, my great-grandmother was 100% Potawatomi, which is a native tribe that originated with the Aztecs, traveled up north, landed in Canada, but were forced out of Canada, and I believe the national headquarters for them now is in Kansas.
Okay, so how would you identify yourself in terms of cultural, ethnic, racial background?
I've never had an instant of feeling the oppression of being native. I've had white privilege my whole life.
And what do you think is important for other cultures to know about your culture?
Well, I'm not so sure that I have culture in terms of race. So far, we've talked about race.
Mm-hmm.
I think more my gender identity is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Being a radical lesbian feminist.
Mm-hmm.
Lived my life as a bisexual, but I
Mm-hmm.
actually, I would say, culturally feel more lesbian.
Okay, and you identify as an equality activist. You are an equality activist.
I
What
do.
does
That's
that
what
mean?
I write down when somebody says, "What's my profession?"
And what does that mean?
It means that any opportunity there is on any front in any of the oppressions on the matrix of domination, that I am dedicated, my life is dedicated to work towards equality.
And was there a particular incident in your life that prompted you towards activism?
You know, I'm asked that all the time. It's very hard. I mean, I was a rather devotional child. A lot of the saints were in service to the poor. It made sense to me. Boycotting grapes when I was a girl. The Kennedys were shot. I grew up in a very conservative house. They were worried about McCarthyism and John Birch Society and Barry Goldwater. I just went off in my own direction towards being beyond liberal. I would say I was a progressive even as a little girl. I don't know why.
And what drew you to the interest in equality? Why equality specifically?
Because it's the root of all the oppressions. It is the fundamental oppression is inequality.
And tell me about your first protest. The first protest you attended.
Well, it is sort of interesting because of what's going on in Chicago right now. I actually was in the streets in downtown Chicago in 1968 at the National Democratic Convention. And the reason why it's really interesting is it's the first time a mayor had riot gear developed. It was because of that convention that police were fully shielded and carrying sprays and billy clubs and had militarized presence in the street. But it was all then about the Vietnam War, and I was married to a man, obviously. There was no same-sex marriage at the time. And he was a conscientious objector, and we were working as hard as we could in any way we could to stop the war, the Vietnam War.
And what was it like when you moved to California from the Midwest?
Well, it was Woodstock 24/7. We lived on the Strand, we sat on the roof, we watched girls in bikinis go up and down the Strand in their roller skates. I taught high school, and my husband worked at a department store in the men's department, and it was a really exciting time to be young, and we were stoned a lot, and it was a good time.
So in 1982, you fasted for the Equal Rights Amendment.
You know, I got this call. It's kind of a long story, but to keep it short because of the time constraints, I got a phone call from a woman inviting me to join 6 others. I thought maybe 70 others, but in fact, when we got there were only 7 of us who fasted 40 days before the deadline for the end of the Equal Rights Amendment's time to be passed. And so we fasted on water publicly in the Rotunda in Springfield, Illinois, for 37 days until the legislature voted against including women in the Constitution.
So what was your biggest learning from that experience?
Well, it came a few years later, and it was that the people who changed the most are the activists. That's why I encourage people to march, to show up, to carry a placard, make a sign. Just go stand on a corner and protest something, because it will change them. It isn't that we're going to necessarily change society, but it will change the activists themselves. And they'll find out how much better life is when you're standing at the edge of change, holding a sign saying something. Black Lives Matter, or Unite Families, or labor rights, whatever it is. It's the action of leaving your house, making the sign, standing there, watching the traffic go by. Hey, all right, beep, beep. It changes the person who stood there on the corner. That's what's important.
You're also a well-known activist in the LGBTQ movement. So what would you say is the biggest difference between the women's movement and this movement?
You know, well, for one thing, it appears falsely, it's a false appearance that the LGBTQ movement went boom so fast. Mm-hmm. So far, all we've done is asked to behave like heterosexuals, so they gave us those two rather easily, which was the right to serve in the military and the right to marry. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the mainstream society is okay with queers as long as they behave like straights. But as soon as we want to behave outside of that boundary, it's not quite so easy, as you can see what's going on regarding bathrooms, for example, or even in immigration. One of the greatest travesties that's going on in immigration right now is in the detention centers. Trans people are put in the opposite gender place. So if you can imagine a trans woman being in a male jail or a male detention center, we're having problems with society understanding what the spectrum of gender is, and because we're breaking convention. You were asking about the similarities with the women's movement, which seems to have been going on forever, admittedly. It took 72 years just to get the vote, and we're still not included in the Constitution. You know, we're stalled at under 20%. We're stalled at ineffectiveness, and I'm hoping that maybe the election in 2016 will change that.
So what's the first step towards changing people's thinking in this country, towards all the underrepresented?
It all has to do with who you know and the stories you tell. It all has to do with, I'm afraid of black people till I meet one. It all has to do with, I'm afraid of homeless people till I talk to one. I'm afraid of anything different than me. I'm afraid of older people. I'm afraid of people with disabilities. I don't know how to talk to somebody in a wheelchair. It all has to do with breaking the ice, breaking the convention, and saying, how are you? Can I know you? Can I say hello to you? When I recently went to Mexico City, I went to Occupy Mexico. And before I went, I knew I needed to learn some key phrases because I don't speak a lick of Spanish. But the first one I wanted to learn was, I'm sorry. Because I figured no matter how much of an ass I made of myself, I could just say, lo siento, and then laugh at myself.
Right.
I think it's the way to cross that bridge with anyone, to have that kind of attitude of, I really want to know you. And what we found out in the gay movement and the queer movement was that once we started telling our stories and people realized that even Cheney has a gay child, Reagan had a gay child, that it wasn't just your hairdresser, it wasn't just your designer, it wasn't just the fashion person. It actually is people in sports, people in football, people in baseball, people in basketball. It actually is people in Congress. We have a lesbian in Congress now. We have gay people. Right here where I live, the mayor is gay. You know, we just need to tell one another so they can get over this idea that we're strange, we're odd, you need to be afraid. No, you don't.
Do you think part of this has to do with your spirituality?
Well,
influencing your thinking?
You know, at the end of John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, who actually was considering ordaining women, and life was very different then. Latin America and liberation theology when all of that ended so abruptly, I decided that I needed to find a religion that actually manifests change. And I became really interested in Buddhism. I went and got a graduate degree at USC in world religion, and I've been a Buddhist since I was about 22. So yeah, it deeply affected me to understand that God actually moves through humanity. God isn't shown up anywhere else. It's only inside of us. It's the only place we can access God and be a part of the change that is unavoidable. You can't go out to a garden and tell those flowers, now just you stop that changing down there. They're going to change and they're all going to be different, and it's wonderful. If only we could understand that about ourselves.
I wanted to go back to the equality question for one moment. Do you think we're going to see equality in our lifetime?
Well, I'm not too sure what that question even means.
Women's equality in the United States.
Yeah, well, under the law, constitutionally, I'm not so sure in my lifetime, maybe in yours. Are we going to see women at a full 50% of Congress, 50% of lawmaking, 50% of running corporations, 50% of hired after medical school? I don't really know. I believe in a quota system. We rank right now, I believe, around number 95 at countries in the world of women in leadership. And the countries that are really in the top 10 had quota systems where they required women to be in elected office. They required a number of seats being made available to women. So I would like to see a quota system put into place. Because when men rule, they put the money into the death machine. It's very simple. When women rule, you can see by just looking at the countries where they do that we're involved in health, education, and welfare. That's where women spend their money. So, given climate change, given what's happening with guns right now, with violence right now, I would prefer to see women ruling the world.
What's the first step that we can take towards that?
To become aware, to behave as if it was true, to behave as if we are equal, to not accept anything less.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your time, Zoe Nicholson.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.